Hey up racers, after a successful first ever race with the Mardave V12, I thought I'd give you a little video to show you the upgrades I've made so far that allowed me to get to my first race meeting. So let's have a look at the car so far. The car is basically stock, but there were some modifications I had to make before I went for my first race, and if I start at the front end I'll show you what I've done so that I could enter the race. The first one was fitting a new front bumper, that was from Camtech. The next one was putting in caster ride height spacers, which I think you might just be able to see there. I got them from a chap called Sean from DDR Racing in Sheffield. Not only does that change the way the wheel sits, so rather than it sitting flat on the chassis, what it does, it picks this front end up and it makes it twist backwards like that, which apparently has an effect on straight line steering. But what it did do was help to lower the front end as well, because it acts as a ride height spacer. Then moving rearward, I played about with a grinder and chopped this top plate about, and then getting towards the back end I put on a rear bumper. I didn't know whether I would be facing forwards or backwards, and I thought if I get hit when the car's the wrong way around, then who knows. I thought I'd best just put a rear bumper on, so that was from Camtech. Because of the front bumper that I fitted, I found that the original Mardave, what you used to be able to do is put your fingers underneath the shell, and there was like a button here, and you press it and it would unclick the shell, and the shell would sort of lift off, come off the back end. However, fitting a front bumper meant that you can't no longer get your fingers in to pull the button, so I decided to put some heavy duty body posts on the front, and then just for simplicity I just thought, well, I'll put a rear body post system on. I don't know what you call these, body pins is it? And that was all from Camtech as well. Another modification that I read about was the wheels, particularly the front wheels, to stop them from digging in and causing it to sort of snatch on the steering, is they said you want to put lots of super glue all around this edge of the tyre so that it makes this tyre wall quite hard. So I did that. It's an absolute mess, and you can probably see there's a little bit of foam missing in places. That's where I've been hitting barriers because I just can't avoid them. So both front wheels were glued, and then I actually glued the tyres onto the rim because they weren't glued on either, so you shouldn't be able to lift that up now. There's super glue on the rim, between the rim and the tyre. And then the only other thing I modified then from original was I put on what's called a Dean's connector, that there. It used to have Tamiya connectors on, and somebody said they're utter rubbish. Well, at this level of racing I could probably got away with leaving the Tamiya connectors on, but one of the new batteries I bought had already got a Dean's connector fitted, so I just thought, oh, you know what, I'm going to solder on a new set of wires. So I bought the wire with a fit connector on already, and then I soldered those on, which I'll be honest, my soldering isn't great, but they are still on and haven't fell off yet, so we'll learn as we go. And then the last DIY mod I did was to countersink the chassis, so all of the screws on the bottom end of the chassis were all countersunk. I did make some errors, like at the back end here I drilled holes, countersunk them, realised they were all in the wrong place, so I had to re-drill and countersink, and it also meant that I had to change the screws out, so I just got some screws off eBay and put countersunk fittings in, which are mostly M3s. Some of the self-tappers were just some I've got at home, so it makes it so that you've got, when you lower it, it won't actually touch the carpet, because the screws that were in it were what's known as panhead screws, which have got a dome on and they're slotted, and because the back ones I'd been using it on tarmac, the back ones were all knocked up, so it was worthwhile just changing those anyway. This was the battery I bought from, I think it was Camtech or Mardave. That's the one that had the Dean's connector already fitted. This is my old battery. I mean, it's very vintage, and I resoldered another cable on that, but as you can see, I didn't make a particularly good job of it. That is soldered under there, but I didn't have any heat shrink, so that actually works, and I can't tell the difference personally between the brand new battery and the old battery. One of the other things I bought was these fireproof battery storage charging things, which they said the club insist on. Well, they seem to do. However, these are not lipos. That's a NiCad, and that is a NIM or nickel metal hydride. So neither of those need a fireproof bag to charge in. However, I thought, well, if that's what the club want me to do, then I'll buy them. So they were off Amazon. Dan gave me a pit mat that he'd not used for a while. So thanks, Dan, for the pit mat. That means that at the club, the tables that you use, they insist on having a pit mat so we don't get super glue all over the tables. And he also made me a little 3D printed pit stand, which is rather handy. It means then you can test the car without having to hold it up. And then something else I had to buy because I wanted to start racing again was to charge these batteries. What I did have was a very cheap resistor thing that you put on a 12-volt battery, and that was a fire waiting to happen. So this was about one of the cheapest multi-function chargers that you could get, and you basically press that button down and then scroll either way and just keep pressing till you get your settings, and you have to set it up so that how many milliamp hours the battery is how much you charge. It's not ever so complicated, but I did find it's a learning curve on making sure that I wasn't setting fire to my batteries by overcharging them or melting them. I think this was about £45, and well, it does for what I need, and it will charge lipos as well. And so with all that done, I just turned up and went racing, and I had a really good night. I didn't really perform very well at all. I managed to count the laps at the end in the final, and I managed 20 laps, which I didn't think was too bad for a complete beginner. And I'm talking a complete beginner. People say I can drive, but I really cannot drive very well at all. I mentioned in the last video that I did experience some significant car issues we couldn't quite resolve. We put additive on the rear tyres. That did seem to help a lot of I was getting rear drift going around the corners sort of sideways. So additive helped that. We put a bit more super glue on the front tyres. That did help a little bit. I had some slight issues with a few screws coming loose underneath, so I think I'm going to have to Loctite some of the machine screws that have got the lock nuts on. Particularly that one came loose, and then the front motor mount, this pod mount ball joint at the front, that came loose, and then the body mounts came loose because I think I just hit too many things going around the track. But it seemed to be the radio gear or the servos that were causing me problems. Steering wise, it would just veer off at its leisure. Then, because it's servo operated speed controller, I found the whole thing really slow, so that when you wanted to change speed, the timing from pressing forwards to this actually doing something, it was almost like, has it worked? Then it works. By that point you've pulled off it again, which did not create a very positive experience, feedback from the driving. And then I think because either the receiver or the servo at the front are so old, again, but you turn and it just takes ages for it to actually seem to work. And the further you got away from the podium, the worse it got. So it meant that in order for me to be able to carry on, I've got to upgrade the radio gear really. You can buy quite reasonably priced radio gear. I'm thinking about £80 gives you a fairly good starting point for radio gear. A lot of the chaps there were recommending Sanwa because I use sticks. If I used wheel, which I've never actually used, I fancy like having a go, but I'm not paying out a lot of money for a wheel transmitter when I've never actually used a wheel transmitter. So for now, we're going to stick with the sticks and invest in new radio gear. And as the chap says, the radio gear is something that always goes with you. Whatever car you get, whatever modifications you make on this, the transmitter is something that you need to get used to. So they said get the one that you really want, and then you haven't got to keep upgrading and changing your radio gears. So that is going to be in my next stage, is to change the radio gear and do some other upgrades and modifications to try and see if I can make this old Mardave V12 at least keep up to some extent with the GT12s that I was racing with. I think it's distinctly possible, and I want to use this as a means to try and improve my driving skills, and then hopefully I won't get lapped quite as much. And then once I improve my driving skills, then I can look at, do I modify and upgrade this particular car a little bit further to try and get it to go faster so that I can be a little bit more competitive. I've been told at the club that you can get a Mardave to run pretty quick, but I do understand that the club don't really want to endorse too much vintage equipment. They're keen for me to go and get something a little bit more modern, but I don't want to spend lots of money at this very early stage of racing, because I'm trying to think of, if you haven't got lots of money and you want to start racing, buying used equipment or older equipment, is it possible to still have a lot of fun, be slightly competitive, be able to improve driving skills, and just get used to the hobby to work out which direction you want to go next if you want to spend that little bit more money. So thanks for watching this video. By all means stay tuned to find out what modifications I make next, and I'll do a video on that. If you can, have a go at racing, and I'll see you on the back of the grid.